So I want to start by, basically today is going to be one big long story. So one big long story with some stuff learned in the middle. And I want to start by saying this, and I need you to hear me say this. Otherwise, I've already had this question. I want to head it off at the pass. No matter how the story turns out today, what I'm going to tell you, I'm still going to be here teaching each week, okay? So can you all hear that? It's like, yeah, Brian isn't going anywhere. Now, that may make you happy or sad, depending on what you think about it. But anyway, either way, I just want that in the back of your mind as I tell this story so that none of you are like, oh, what does this mean? Okay, it means I'm still going to be here. So this year has been what I would call a refining year in my life. So many of you know that back in January, I was one of the many that was chosen in my company to be laid off. And that was a surprise. Never been laid off my whole life before. And so I got laid off, and all of a sudden I had to go home and tell my wife, I don't have a job anymore. So that was an interesting day. And it was scary. There was a lot of emotion. But my wife and I really wanted to make sure that we met that challenge with trusting in God. I wanted to rely on God and see what God could do in the middle of a job hunt, which so many Americans are going through, right? Layoffs happen all the time. So it was like, all right, I want to trust in God, see what he'll do. So I really did all the things everybody does when they're hunting for a job, sent out resumes and everything, but I would make sure that I started my day trusting in God, praying and seeking his will, whatever you want, God. And I had one really bad day in the middle, but even that was a good learning point for me. And then within a couple of months, God had opened up 3 jobs for me, and I got to pick. And I picked the one that I have now, which is I'm the vice president of learning and development at a large trucking company down in Dubuque. And it has been, it's 7 months this week, 7 months. It has been an absolute blast. I love what I do. I love every day. It is not an exaggeration to say that my weeks just fly, my days just fly, because I get to do what I love doing. So, and I very confidently told my wife when I took this job, and I would be driving from Dodgeville to Dubuque every day. For those of you watching online, my commute is 50 minutes one way. And I told my wife very confidently, I can handle this. This isn't going to be a big deal. I can handle a commute that long. No big deal, right? So she just trusted me and believed me. And I started doing this. The only problem was, it would be different if I only had one job. But I also love what I do here, and I love being at Peniel, and I love doing this. And so the only way I could balance it was I would get up at 4:30 in the morning every day. I do all my prep work for here. I spend my time alone with God. I get in my car and drive an hour to work, and then I work till 5 and drive an hour home. So every day is 4:30 to 6 every single day, and then I work on the weekends. So within a couple of months, I started to feel like, oh, there's a problem. I can't physically do this. I had no margin in my life. I mean, I'd come home just dog-tired, as you can imagine, and I was like, I don't know how to keep doing this schedule. And so I really sincerely prayed. I mean, I don't just talk about this stuff. I really try and live it out. The will of God should be the most important part of our lives. So I was beginning to pray and say, God, are you trying to say something? Do I have the wrong job? Nope. I love what I do. Should I not be here at Peniel? And I sincerely prayed, are you closing the door on this? It's like, nope, don't feel that at all. Quite the opposite. And I was grateful for that because I love what I do here. And so then the only thing left was, should we move closer to Dubuque? So we started looking at houses in Platteville because that would be the exact same distance to get to here from Dodgeville. No difference. But obviously for me, it would cut my commute in half. So we started praying, started looking, and we found a house in July that we really liked in Platteville, and we put an offer in, and it was accepted. So then all we could do is sell our house. And if you knew anything about the first part of the year in Dodgeville especially, the housing market was hot. I mean, you put stuff out, and it sold fast. You'd often get bidding wars. It would be gone in a weekend many times. And we saw this happen with one of our kids. We put the house out. It was like, wow, that was awesome. So we put our house on the market end of July on a Friday, and it was our birthday weekend, so we both have birthdays back-to-back days. And so we had planned to take Monday and Tuesday off to have a getaway, but we canceled it. We canceled our getaway because you're going to have so many offers to look at on Monday and Tuesday that we wanted to be with the realtor and have them spread out in front of us. I'm not making this up. So we canceled that. didn't quite work that way. We timed it so perfectly that the moment we put our house on the market is the moment that our housing market in Dodgeville stopped being hot. Do you know that Wall Street Journal recently reported that it's been so bad that it is the worst housing market since 1995. And that's what we're trying to sell. So we couldn't even get people to look at it, let alone offer it. And so we had an offer on this house. It was contingent on the sale of our house. And we couldn't even and we barely had anyone even come and look at the house, certainly no offers. And days went by, and it's a contingent offer. And so finally the owner of the house said, you got to pull the contingency. And so we pulled the contingency, and it sold, it was gone. And now we were sitting there going, what do we do now? And we had lowered the price, and lowered the price, and lowered the price. And we got to this point where we're like, no more. And so now we have no house. We've dropped our house price substantially. Nobody's still making an offer. Have you ever been in a spot where you struggled to keep trusting God when it doesn't seem like He's doing anything at all? You ever been praying about something, and instead of it getting better, it seems to get worse? Have you ever been in a spot when you didn't know the way forward? You just knew you couldn't stay where you were. That's exactly where we were. And in the middle of all that, we had some amazing God experiences that have changed the way that I really look at God, and I want to share them with you today as we finish this series that we've been in called Refinery Sessions. And I told you when I started this series 5 weeks ago, these are about the things that God has been refining in me. And when I started this series 5 weeks ago, I couldn't have told you the story that I'm about to tell you, but I'm so grateful I get to tell you today. I want to talk to you about what to do when the way forward is unclear. Would you grab your notes? Inside your program are these notes. If you haven't taken them out, would you take them out? Grab a pen, and welcome, of course, to those you're watching online. We always love that when you send us emails and comments. If you go to our website at Pendle Church Life, you have these notes. You can download them for free. Let's talk about 3 things that we've learned. So the first thing is, and it may sound really, really unfamiliar, when you are at a place where you can't see the way forward, the first thing is expect God's blessing. Expect His blessings. Which feels really counterintuitive. I can't see a way forward. It doesn't seem like you're doing anything, and you want me to expect the blessing of God in that situation? That doesn't seem to match. So let me show you what I mean. Back about a year, just over a year ago, I added a new habit to my time with God in the morning. When I read my Bible and I pray, I also have picked up devotional books, and I'll read a little bit out of a devotional book. And so a year ago, I picked up this wonderful book, The Autobiography of George Mueller, which we give away for free every single week here. And for those of you watching online, if you ever want a copy, let us know. And I know people have done that. We will gladly send you one. George Mueller is a man who cared for 10,000 orphans in his lifetime without ever having any money. He simply prayed, trusted in God, and God provided every single day, all the needs. And He detailed everything. It's all in here. You can read incredible stories of trusting God. Your faith will just be supercharged by this book. So I was reading that. What a lucky thing when I got laid off. About trusting God and relying on Him. And I just kept reading it every day. And one day, when I was in the middle of searching for a job and not knowing where I was going to go, I read this quote from George Mueller in his biography. He said, "We must then continue in prayer until the blessing is given to us. Furthermore, we have to believe that God does hear us and will answer our prayers." So I really want you to think about that second part before we move on to the next. Do you believe that God hears you and that God will answer your prayers? Now, many of you would say, yeah. But then he said something else that was... I can't emphasize enough how much this impacted me when I read these words. Look what he said. Frequently we fail in not continuing in prayer until the blessing is obtained and not expecting the blessing from God. And those words just hit me like a 2x4, not expecting the blessing from God. And I was so stunned by what he said See, I've taught many, many times. If you've heard me teach over the years, you've heard me teach many times on this verse. Jesus said, my Father's always working and so am I. And I've taught many times these things, that God is always working in your lives, even when you can't see it. He is always working. Why? Because Jesus can't lie. He cannot lie. So everything he said is true. So that means he's at work even when you and I can't see it. So I've always believed that. I've believed that for years, and I've taught it, and that God is working for me because, again, he promised that, not against me. And God is working to make things better. And then all of a sudden I read this quote from George Mueller in the middle of a job hunt, and it was this: God not only wants to work, but he wants to bless me in the middle of this job hunt. And I'm like, bless me? And then he asked the question, do you actually expect it? And I didn't. And I honestly really struggled with this, because there's a thought in my mind that says, who am I that he would want to bless me? And I know who I am. Through faith in Jesus, you become his son or daughter. You're his child. What parent doesn't want to bless their child? Every good parent wants to bless their child. Every good parent wants to. So it was a big wrestling match, and I want to be really clear what I'm talking about when I talk about the blessing of God in your life. I am not talking about the American dream. Okay, let me be really clear about that. I am not saying that the blessing of God is now all of a sudden you'll have a big house and big cars and a big boat and a big RV and lots of money, and you'll never have a problem again. That is the American dream, and the more we pursue that materialistic dream, the more mentally ill we become as a nation. Because money and stuff aren't making us happier. They're making us angrier and more discontent and more medicated, because things will never satisfy the deepest longing inside of you, which is what your soul longs for, which is reality. And none of these things are reality. On your deathbed, you won't care about your stuff. You won't care about it. It won't matter to you. Your soul wants what's real, and money and stuff aren't real. So I am not saying that the blessing is God's going to give you lots of cash. I'm saying he's going to give you himself. And he will work in the situation where the outcome can only be attributed to God. That's a blessing. If it's just you really working hard and getting it, that's not God's blessing, that's you. You earned it. But if it is God showing up in your life, in that situation, in that moment, doing what you could never do, now you've been blessed by God. So I'll ask you the two questions Mueller asked. Do you believe that God wants to bless you? And are you willing to keep praying until you see the blessing of God? That's what I'm asking you today. Do you believe it? And are you willing to continue to pray until he does? It's interesting. Now that this is in my mind, and it's been in my mind all year long, when you read the Bible now, you see this everywhere. I was reading this week in Ephesians chapter 3. Look at this verse. Both, talking about Jews and Gentiles, they're both part of the same body, the church, and both, look at that, enjoy the promise of blessings because they belong to Christ Jesus. So now he says, through faith in Jesus, you get the promise of God, and here's God's promise in your life: I will bless you. The promise of God's blessing is his offer to you. And it's because we belong to him through his son Jesus. Now, again, let me be really clear what I'm not saying. And this is what I've screwed this up in my past. I am not saying that God is saying, go out and do whatever you want, and I'll go out and do whatever I want to do. I'm going to make every decision I want, whatever I want to go. And God, your job is to follow along and just bless everything I do. That's not how this works. If you read the biography of George Mueller, you will see that the way it works is, flip your notes over in the back. I put his 6-step process anytime he needed to discover the will of God. And the first step is the most important step, and I practiced this in my life for about 15 years. It begins with surrendering your will to God. I love this quote in there. It says, Mueller said, I seek at the beginning to get my heart into such a state that it has no will of its own in regard to a given matter. So here's how this practically played out when it came to all the decisions my wife and I were making this year. We started saying, God, do you want us to move to Platteville? We'll say yes or no. You show us what you want. Your will be done. Do you want us to say yes to this house? Your will be done. You get your heart in the place where the very first thing you're willing to do is, God, I'll make this decision. You just show me what you want. Your will be done. So I want you to understand this really, really clearly. on your notes, God's blessing is conditional. If you just think that what I'm saying is you go out and make any decision you want and God's job is to tail behind you, blessing everything you do, then you are not hearing me at all and you're not accurately understanding what Jesus taught. There are 3 parts to this condition. You have to belong to Jesus. That's what that verse said in Ephesians 3. You have to belong to him. The good news about that is that's available to every human being anywhere on the planet at any time. Anybody, through faith in Jesus, can be adopted into the family of God forever. Anyone, anytime, anywhere. This is an amazing gift of grace that he's given us all. Second, you have to believe that he wants to actually bless you. For some of you, that's the holdup. You just don't think he does, so you don't pray until you see it. And then, like Mueller taught us, you have to seek his will above everything else. These are the conditions that put us in a position where God is going to bless us. It's literally what Jesus said when he said this: seek the kingdom of God above all else and live righteously, and he will give you everything you need. So, here's what happened in our family. So, we lost the house. We dropped the price. Nothing was moving. And we really debated everything and prayed, God, are you telling us to stay in Dodgeville? Are we not supposed to move? We couldn't find anything. We couldn't find any houses that we wanted to even look at. So finally, a realtor said, why don't you just go tour a bunch of houses? Because maybe you'll see something you like. So Shanna went with the girls, not me. Because I'm like, well, okay, go ahead. So they went and they started touring houses, and all of a sudden I get a report back. They toured this house, and they didn't want to leave. They loved it that much. They just wanted to stay. And I'm like, okay. But I looked at the pictures online, and I didn't even want to go see it, honestly, because we'd seen it. It'd been available for a long time. And I looked at the pictures, I'm like, nope, not interested. But they loved it. So I'm like, all right, got to go look at it. So I didn't have a lot of hope, and we toured 3 houses that night, and when we got to that one, it was like, oh, wow. They messed up all these pictures, because this is not what the house looks like. Thank God, because how many other people like me were like, no, I'm not going to go tour that thing. And because I had no interest. And yet when we walked in, I totally understood what they were saying. So then it was back to what we just said, right? Pray, seek the will of God. God, do you want us to do this? Yes or no? Do you want us to do it? And so we put in an offer on that house, and we just prayed, God, your will be done, and contingent on the sale of our house, which was going so well. So here we go again, right? And they came back, and they said, we will accept your offer on one condition: drop the contingency of the sale of your house. Which would mean then, if we didn't sell the house before we closed, we'd own 2 houses. That doesn't sound fun. But then they said, if you'll do this, what we'll do is we'll set up an escrow account with all of this money in it, and for the next 7 months, you can draw this amount of money from it every single month to pay your entire mortgage on your Dodgeville house. And it would make it so that we would have another 8 months to sell our house without having any extra expenses. Nobody has ever even heard of this. So we're sitting there praying, God, what's your will about this? And they come back with an offer like that. So all of a sudden it's like, because if they would have just come back and said, drop the contingency, we'd have said, no, thank you. But then you're offering to give us thousands and thousands of dollars that we can use it would have more than paid our mortgage and our expenses at our Dodgeville house. So now all of a sudden it's like, okay, is this a blessing of God? Are we supposed to do this? And so we prayed about it. We couldn't find anyone who'd ever heard of it. So we said yes. We counted the cost. The Bible is really clear about that. We sat down, we budgeted. What if worst case scenario happens and we lose and it takes longer than 8 months to sell it? Can we afford to balance this carefully? And so we really did our diligence. And we prayed and we said yes. Still had to sell our house. And then what happened is we got an offer substantially below asking. We countered, they dropped immediately. And then we got another offer, even lower. And we'd already dropped 3 times by this time. And I was we were going to counter, and I was standing in the kitchen with my wife, and all of a sudden I had a thought pop in my mind. It was really the culmination of this whole year. And I said to my wife, if it's not a blessing, God's not done. Now, I would love to tell you that I stood here with complete confidence in that sentence, that I was just a man of unbelievable faith. Thankfully, you know what Jesus said? All you need is a speck of faith aimed at him. You don't need mountain-sized faith to move mustard seeds. You need tiny little mustard seeds to move mountains. And that's what I had, was a small amount of faith. But that's okay, because at the same time God was teaching me this, if it's not a blessing, God's not done, God was teaching my wife something. And oh, did this tie together. Look at this. Number 2, don't let your faith turn to gravel. This is one of my favorite things that I've ever learned. It comes directly from what God was teaching my wife. Are you all familiar with the parable of the soils that Jesus told? So he told this story 3 times. It's recorded in the New Testament. The parable of soils. There was a farmer who went out one day to sow some seed. He wanted to grow some plants, and so he's planting he's throwing his seed out there. He said it landed on 4 different types of soil, and then he explains that the seed is the good news of Jesus Christ, and the soils are the 4 different reactions you see even in our world to this day. So here's soil number 1. It's soil beside the road. So you can the path that you would walk on, if you walk on it every day, and they didn't have concrete and, blacktop, so their paths would be like concrete though, right? So he said, this is what some people are like. They're so opposed to God that when they hear the good news of Jesus, they immediately reject it. Nope, don't believe it at all. And he says, what happens is then the good news is snatched away by the evil one, and they forget about it. So he said, some people are like that. You have that. You have people in your life that are so hostile to God, they will not even consider who Jesus is at all. That's soil number 1. Then soil number 2 is this rocky soil. We'll come back to that one. Third one is the thorny soil, which is like they've got all these thorny plants. The seed falls in there, and there's ground to take root in, but as it grows up, the things around it are bigger and stronger, and they take all the nutrients, choke it out. And he said, these are people who hear the good news of Jesus, and they're like, oh my goodness, this is awesome, but boy, I want more stuff. If I could just have more stuff, because stuff will make me happy. If I could have more things and more money and more materialistic things, and it chokes out the truth of who Jesus is and what he wants to offer us, and we miss him. Because we would rather have earthly things that don't last anyway than him. And so that's what he said this soil is like. And then there's a 4th soil, it's the good soil, that hears and receives this good news of Jesus, and it changes their life, and God uses them to change others because that's his purpose for you. Listen, his purpose for you is not to sit. His purpose for you is to serve in this world and make a difference, and he wants to partner with you. That's his purpose for you. So seeking his will, and that is really important, and lives are changed. But this was the soil that got my wife's attention. This one. So this is the soil where there's a lot of rocks on it, and it springs up. Well, let me actually show you what it says. Look what Jesus said. The seed on the rocky soil represents those who hear the message and immediately receive it with joy. But since they don't have deep roots, they don't last long. They fall away as soon as they have problems. The 2 P's, problems or persecution. So somebody starts saying, oh, you believe in Jesus, you're stupid, or they persecute. I became a Christian in high school, so persecution went with it. It's like, oh boy. And then problems. So my wife was reading this at the same time we're going through all this, and she reads this verse, and she says, oh my goodness, my faith, she said, is like gravel. My faith is like gravel. And she's very honest about it. She knows that when we get bad news or problems, that her mind can start to spin with all the negative what ifs. Oh, what if? And they're never positive, they're negative, and it can make her feel, it creates worry inside of her. So she's reading these verses in the middle of this whole situation, and she says, I don't want my faith to be gravel. And I loved that sentence. Meaning, I don't want these problems to become bigger than God's power in my life. So periodically, she would say to me when she was thinking about bad news or bad scenarios, she would actually say to me, gravel. And I loved that. I just loved the word. Oh, because here's what I hear Jesus saying is, these are people who say, I'll trust you until. I'll trust you until the problems get too big, then I'm not trusting you anymore. Until I face too much persecution, then I'm not following you anymore. That's this kind of faith. And so when she would say gravel, what I would hear in my mind, because I was the guy who literally stood in the kitchen and said, if it's not a blessing, God isn't done yet. I hope. Because I'm like, here's what was in my mind in that moment. It was like, but we've missed the window. And nobody's selling anything right now. How can he bless this? So when she would say gravel, it struck me so much that in this situation where we are tempted to worry about the problem, we should trust Jesus and expect a blessing instead. And that's what it did when she would say it to me. We don't want gravel faith. Faith that falls apart when problems come up. Faith that trusts in Jesus until things get difficult. That's not the faith we want. And it just struck us so much that this is an opportunity now in the middle of these problems to trust in him. And so it's just what he says, just what the New Testament says. Give all your worries and cares to God. Why? Because he cares about you. And I really want you to think about the answer to this question. Is there a lot of gravel in your faith today? Is your faith turning to gravel? Because some of you are facing some big problems, right? Some of you have some bad situations that are happening in your life. What's happening to your faith? Are the problems getting so big that the power of God seems really small? That's what happened as I stood in the kitchen that day. Oh, I know if it's not a blessing, he isn't done, but boy, what can he do? He's got no options. Because I couldn't see any. Oh, Lord. And the solution to that is you get your focus back on the character and power and love and grace of this real God that we serve. That's the solution. And God had a perfect plan for that in my life. One of the perks of driving that far every single day is you got nothing else to do. So I listen to Spotify. And I would listen to things that would really build my faith because I wanted to use the time wisely. And I love this author named Dallas Willard. And so I was listening to stuff about Dallas Willard, this spiritual giant. And I came across a podcast where someone was just talking about him. Of all the things, this is the podcast I find, thank God. The Next Right Thing by Emily Freeman, episode 111. If you have never heard me talk about this, would you just write that down somewhere and put it on Spotify? You can actually Google it, just Google it, and you can find it that way too. The Next Right Thing by Emily Freeman, episode 111. I can't even tell you what it was like in the middle of September when we're going through all this, and I come across this podcast. I started on my way to Dubuque, and I listened to this, and it's about 8 minutes long. And I was so overwhelmed that I immediately hit rewind and listened to it all again. And then I immediately hit rewind and listened to it all again. And in the first day, I listened to it 8 times. Over and over and over and over and over again. Then the next day, I sent it to all of my kids. I said, listen, if you can just give 8 minutes, would you go listen to this? Please, just listen to this. Because it's having such an impact on my faith. So for those of you who've never heard this, and many of you haven't ever looked it up before, I really want to encourage you to. In there, she has a quote from Dallas Willard. That's why it tripped on my search when I was looking for it that day. Dallas Willard once said this: never believe anything bad about God. Never. And that struck me so hard when I heard it. And she said in the podcast, Dallas Willard said, God is not only good, he's also not bad. He's not bad. Have you ever believed anything bad about God? I have. That's what struck me so hard. I have at different seasons of my life believed God doesn't care about me. I believed he doesn't notice. I believed he doesn't know what he's doing. You ever believe that? Like you are a screw up as a God. Because I'm pretty sure I could do better right now than you. You ever thought that? Maybe you're like afraid to admit it. It's like he knew it anyway. That's what I've thought. I believe bad things about God, that he won't help me, that I don't really, deep down matter to him. I believe these things, and it's destroyed my faith, my ability to trust him. It turned my faith to gravel. And so I have listened to that podcast at least 50 times. Every day I start my commute with that podcast, every single day, because what I determined is in the middle of this, I was not going to believe something bad about God. Even in silence from heaven and no offers at all, and I'm just not going to believe something bad. And one of the things she talks about is different versions of God we have in our mind that are so screwed up. And one of them is a carnival barker. You know what a carnival barker is? You ever been on a carnival and there's somebody say, hey, step on up, come on up, play my little game. And so you can step up. And I always picture it this way. You ever seen a game like this? You know, got the carnival barker saying, come on up, pay your money, and guess where the ball is, and they move it around. And so it's like, this is what God, this is the image that I've had at times of God, what God is basically like without ever putting it in these words. It's like, God, I really want to do your will. I'll pay my money and I will guess which one is your will. I'm going to guess. Oh, I guessed wrong. And God goes, I'll take all your money, and now you get a ruined life from here on out. Sorry you couldn't guess my will. Terrible to be you, right? It's like, that's not what he's like. He's not cruel. He's not mean. He's not making you try to guess. He's not trying to make it super hard for you so that you give up in frustration. And in the middle of all that, I've taught a couple of times on this over the last few months because I happened to be reading the story of the prodigal son and was so struck by the dad in that story who welcomes back his wayward son in this incredible way. And I've taught on it multiple times because Jesus' point is the dad in the story is our God in heaven. This is our God, a God who just loves us, who always wants us. Even when we don't want to be with ourselves, because he always wants to be with us. And he wants to restore us, and he wants to help us. And if you ever read the story of the prodigal son, you cannot walk away from it without understanding that he wants to bless us. Because the end of the story of the prodigal son is this kid who's totally screwed up his life. He comes back to the Father, and God blesses him, and blesses him, and blesses him. This is our Father. This is our Father. This is the God we're praying to. And so I did not want to believe something bad about God. And so in the middle of all of this, with our little faith, we're going to just trust that if it's not a blessing, he's not done. We're going to watch for problems. We're not going to turn to gravel faith, but we're going to continue to believe in a God like this. Here's what happened. So it was about Saturday when we got that low offer. Lowest we'd gotten, and we were discouraged. And we're like, because when somebody say, we're going to send you an offer, you're like, all right. Not in your wildest dreams do you hope that it's like the lowest offer ever. And when we came through, we're like, what's he doing? And so we moved a little. They moved a little. And we were going to move a little. And we were just praying. And that's right when I said, if it's not a blessing, he's not done. But I don't see how he can bless this. With that little bit of mustard seed faith that I had, we just kept praying. And so that started Saturday, and we started this little process. And about Tuesday or Wednesday that week, we were notified that another couple wanted to come and look at it on Thursday. Now, they had been there about a month earlier, and they loved it, but they were concerned about, how far away it was from their jobs, and would they be okay. And so they decided to come and look again that week, that Thursday. So they came that Thursday, and that Thursday night we were told they loved it, they want to put an offer in, and they knew that we were negotiating with someone else. So the next day, I'm at work, my phone goes off, I'm in a meeting, but I'm not running it, so I just glance at my phone and look at it, and I'm like, oh, well, that's weird. And I put my phone down, I don't think about it again until I get a break, because the offer that came in wasn't a full price offer. It was above asking. And just like that, everything fell in place. We closed this Wednesday. Yep, we moved to Platteville. Remember what I said at the beginning? Won't change anything about my work here. And then we close on our house in Dodgeville around November 21st. And we won't ever touch $1 of the escrow. So, if it's not a blessing, he's not done. And now we say those words very different because we've experienced the blessing of God. We've experienced it. So a couple of things as we finish. Do you believe that God wants to bless you? You got to sort that out. I'm sad to know that I'm 54 years old. I've been following Jesus for a long, long time, and only this year did I learn that God wanted this for us. I never knew it. I knew he was working, but I never knew that he wanted to bless me. And if that's true, then do you keep praying until you see the blessing of God in the areas where you're praying? Or do you give up? When it gets hard, when nothing seems to be changing, you just quit? Like Mueller said so many times, the reason why we don't see the activity of God is we quit before the blessing of God arrives. And again, really think through those conditions. Do you belong to Jesus? This is the best part of it. I mean, if we just talked about this part of it, we could talk about amazing things forever, that he loves you enough that he died on the cross for all of us, so that we could be completely forgiven and adopted into his family. This is amazing good news. And anybody, anytime who wants to, can be accepted by him right now. But do you also expect his blessing, and are you seeking his will first? And that's a process. Just start by saying, here's a decision, God. I'll say yes or no. Show me what you want. Just start with that, so that his will becomes more important to you. And this one, is your faith full of gravel? Because some of you know it is. Because the problems seem so big, and they seem bigger than the power of God. That was me. How could God bless this? And God's like, Brian, are you kidding me? You know how easy this is for me to bless this? Is your faith full of gravel? How are your problems impacting your faith today? Let me have you bow your heads as we finish today. For some of you, it's time to make the decision to let Jesus Christ give you the gift that he wants to give you. This gift of forgiveness and life, because he loves you more than I will ever be able to tell you. More than I will ever be able to tell you, he loves you. And his every thought towards you is love, and he wants to bless you. And the first blessing is forgiveness and life. If you will let him give you this gift, he will give it to you today. It's a simple step of faith where you come to Jesus and you say, Jesus, I need you. I'm putting my trust in you today. Would you please forgive me? Please forgive me and come make your home inside of me. I'm going to give you my life today. I want to belong to you. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this service today. We hope as a church and pray that this was something that really helps connect you deeper to Jesus. That's what we're all about as a church. If you need to communicate with us, if you go online to penuelchurchlife.com, in the upper right-hand corner is a box that says, I said yes to Jesus. It also says, please pray for me. Just click on that, and it'll take you to a place where you can communicate with us as a church. So if you ever want any of the resources we mentioned in a service, go there and let us know. We'll gladly send them to you. Or if you made a decision to say yes to Jesus or you have a prayer request, just let us know. And we're always glad to hear from the people who are watching online. And if we can continue to help you grow in your faith in any way, then we want to do that. So again, thank you. And our prayer is that you continue to grow and connect and find the true life that Jesus Christ is offering.